Good evening, everyone. A particularly warm welcome to the members of the public who have joined us tonight, and especially to the Honourable Luke Edmonds, MLC, who's a former councillor and here for the last meeting of this current term of council. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and their ongoing spiritual commitment to the land that we're meeting on tonight, and I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Could I ask everyone in the chamber to please stand for the council prayer. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the city of Clarence. Amen. Thank you. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and what's said at this meeting is not protected by privilege. There's a link to the agenda papers on Council's website. I note we have a full house tonight, so there's no apologies. Are there any declarations of elected representatives or close associate? Thank you. Move to item 4, the omnibus items. I'll go through those one by one, and we'll have a motion on those once I've completed that. So firstly, confirmation of minutes. I'd like to, Alderman von Burroath's drawing our attention to a correction required on closed item 11.6 of the previous minutes. I'd now propose that the draft minutes of the council meeting held on the 26th of September 2022, as circulated, be taken as read and confirmed, subject to the following amendment to closed item 11.6. Subject to the final report being provided to council out of session, that those words should be appended to the first item of that. And finally, that Alderman von Burroath be recorded as voting for the recommendations 2 and 3. Are there any questions on that before I proceed to the rest of the items? Thank you. I'll table that. Item 4.2, Mayor's Communications. Several items. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the retirement of our Manager for Health and Community Development, Mr John Toohey. John commenced working with Clarence City Council on the 24th of May 1999 as Manager of Customer Services. In that capacity, he was responsible for customer service, city ranges and also community services. In the 2009 reorganisation, John took on additional responsibility for regulatory services, cultural arts and events, youth services and children's services. He has also acted as our GM on occasions. During his 23 years of service with Council, John has seen the city grow considerably, and his team has been at the coalface of Council's relations with the public, responsible for many new initiatives as well. John, I'd like to thank you for your outstanding service to the City of Clarence and wish you and Anna all the very best for the future. Secondly, elected reps would recall that the CEO and myself met with representatives of Chambroad a couple of weeks ago, and at the last council meeting there was a delegation made to the Chief Executive Officer to protect Council's interests in regard to that arrangement. Could I ask the General Manager to report on his initiative in that regard?
Thank you, Mayor. Through a series of meetings and negotiations with Chambroad representatives, we have reached an agreement, and I'll read from a media statement which we'll release tonight. Clarence City Council and Chambroad Overseas Investment Australia entered into a sale and development agreement in 2017 following a vote in favour of the development. Under this agreement, Chambroad was required to achieve substantial commencement by the 12th of October 2022. Chambroad has requested an extension of time to achieve substantial commencement, And while Chambroad remains committed to the development, it has also provided an alternative proposal for part of the site due to the current inability to secure an education provider, which would enable the hotel development to proceed within a quicker timeframe. Rather than make a decision on an extension of time and then separately consider the alternative proposal, Council and Chambroad have agreed a process to defer consideration of the extension of time in order to properly consider that alternative proposal. In accordance with this agreed alternative process, Chambroad will provide Council with a briefing and details of its alternative proposal, and Council will have until the 21st of December 2022 to accept the alternative proposal and grant an extension of time or to refuse both. This process reserves the rights of both Council and Chambroad under the Sale and Development Agreement. Thank you.
I'm happy to take any questions on that particular announcement. Alderman Blomley.
Mr Mayor, thank you for that, General Manager. If we could, elected members, be sent a copy of that release prior to, at the same time it goes out to the media, that would be this evening, that would be appreciated.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Given that there was a clause in the Sale and Development Agreement that substantial commencement had to be undertaken before the 12th of October 2022, was this council at liberty to be able to act upon that Sale and Development Agreement in order to A, do one of two things? Firstly, to say there wasn't an extension of time granted, and B, that the council could start to initiate the buyback provisions as it had under the Sale and Development Agreement until April 2023.
Thank you, Alderman James. I might answer that and call on the CEO to add anything to it. But firstly, there would have been a number of options available to Council, clearly. But Council, in its wisdom at the meeting, asked the General Manager at the time to preserve our rights under that agreement, and that's what he's just reported on. I don't know whether you want to add to that.
No, I think that captures everything.
Can I just ask a supplementary question? Mr Mayor, it's my understanding that the Sale and Development Agreement was for a hotel, excuse my voice, and a training centre. That was part and parcel of the agreement. If there was to be any change in relation to the SDA, which incorporated a hotel and a training establishment, is it then therefore that particular arrangement between Council and Chambroad would be null and void, because it would appear that the training centre is no longer going to be part of the arrangement which has been in place since 2017, and therefore it would be a substantial change to the Sale and Development Agreement, and therefore it wouldn't be able to proceed on that basis.
I'll ask the CEO to respond to that, please.
Thank you. So the arrangement that's been negotiated allows Council to consider that alternative development and preserves Council's rights in terms of whether to exercise the buyback or to provide a process and potentially a new agreement if it agrees that the alternative proposal is worth supporting. So in the absence of Council being able to properly assess any alternative proposal, that's why we've negotiated that period of time to effectively allow that to happen and then to step back into the position we were in by the end of this year, if we wish to do that.
Okay. Councillor Mulder.
Thank you. I nearly caught on my own pocket. My question relates to the proposal that has been put forward, the alternative proposal. From your statement, I gather that they are talking about developing the site of the hotel.
Correct.
What is their proposal concerning those major buildings that were to be the hospitality school? Are they walking away from that hospitality school and the buildings altogether, or are they proposing some other use for those buildings?
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. Through you, Mayor. It's the latter, Councillor Mulder. The proposal at this point essentially boils down to Chambroad saying that they haven't been able to secure an education provider for the hospitality school facility. That comprises buildings B and C, the two buildings closest to Cambridge Road, and effectively they are wishing to discuss alternative proposals for buildings B and C. Now that could take any number of avenues, and that's the reason why I've negotiated that period of time to allow Chambroad to come forward, properly discuss that, and then council make an informed decision.
As a supplementary, or just to cap that discussion off, what the alternative proposal is virtually the same scale, same size, same bulk, same footprint of buildings as the original thing, but with a simple change of use from hospitality school to something else.
Thank you.
Is that their proposal?
I would be more broad-ranging than that. Ultimately, it's a matter for Chambroad to put forward and for council to potentially look at raise any issues. I can advise council that I have in my negotiations raised a number of possibilities with Chambroad and effectively asked them to bring a more developed proposal through to council considering some of those factors. Now, some of those factors did address the issue of bulk and scale as a community concern, so that has been raised with them.
Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank the CEO for those answers, and I thought they were very good. Now, in the agreement, there's no chance that Chambroad can on-sell that piece of land to anybody?
No, I've taken steps within my delegation to address that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to move on if there are no further questions on that matter, and simply table meetings and attendances for myself. Deputy Mayor and Councillor Mulder attended an event on my behalf as well. Item 4.3, the Council notes the workshop, well there's no workshop, but notes the agenda briefing on Friday the 14th of October. Item 4.4, petitions. Are there any petitions to table? Thank you. Reports from outside bodies. I note that the Copying Joint Authority has the September quarterly report outstanding. Are there any other matters from Copying?
Just to report that the AGM will be held on the 25th of this month.
Thank you. I have nothing to report in regard to Taswater or the Hobart, Greater Hobart Committee. Reports from Council and Special Committees and other representative bodies. We have 3 committee reports there: the Bicycle Advisory Committee, Natural Resource Management and Tracks and Trails Advisory Committee. Would any of the chairs like to speak to any of those reports?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Ewing.
Yeah, well, as the chair of the Bike and the Tracks and Trails Committee, I suppose I'd like to thank those committee representatives that have been on that committee for the last 4 years working with me and the other council staff. Anyone that puts their hand up to help the community in a volunteer role, deserves a pat on the back, and I think the experience and knowledge that those people bring to the community has played a huge role in helping us shape our policies in those spaces. And I'd make special mention for Mary McParland, who's basically been the key person writing the reports and doing a lot of work in the background, and Mary's done a fantastic job to help in that space. And I suppose the other point I wish to make is that I'd still, I know we've got a bit of work to do on our review of our council committee structure, but I'd encourage my colleagues and future colleagues who are on council next time to look at our ways of having a subcommittee or some input from communities with expertise in those areas, and I think their knowledge and expertise would be valuable to maintain in the long term. Even if it's only every 6 months or whatever, I think having those people involved in the long term, I think should be something we should be considering. But once again, thanks to everyone that's been involved, and it's been a pleasure working with all involved in those committees.
Thank you. Councillor Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With regard to the Natural Resources Management Quarterly Report, again, I'd like to thank Justin Burgess for his work on this and the committee for their valuable time, but also draw attention to the fact that we're now explicitly referring to climate change initiatives, which is very appropriate at the moment, and that the role of this committee in whatever form it takes in the future is much broader and includes sustainability of Clarence as per our strategic report. So it's really good to see some of that actually explicitly listed in this report, and I do commend the report to Council.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, as the alternate chairperson for the Bicycle Advisory Committee for the last 4 years, I've got to say it's probably been one of the easiest positions I've had on all the committee work that I've been involved in, due in large part to the chairmanship of Alderman Newington. So on behalf of all the community members who have approached me in recent days and weeks, I'd just like to pass on their thanks to Alderman Newington for his leadership and all the work that he's done in partnership, as he says, with Mary McFarlane, but also Mr Graham's team as well in the engineering department. It's been a fantastic committee to be a part of. We've achieved a great deal over the past, over this term of council, and in Greater Hobart everyone talks about our bicycle trails, tracks and trails, and there's more to be done, of course, but I'd just like to put on the record, Mr Mayor, on behalf of the committee, our thanks to Alderman Newington.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Yeah, look, thank you, Mr Mayor, and I think rather than ask the chair of the Bicycle Committee with his condolence, I'd like to address a question through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Graham. On page 12 of the agenda, the Mornington interchange has been referred to, and I quote, "The Department of State Growth has engaged a consultant to progress the traffic study. Community engagement was undertaken in October 2021 to identify issues within the study area. Council officers were involved in the workshop on the 20th of April 2022 to consider the preferred options and enabling works ahead of further community consultation," unquote. My question through you to Mr Graham. Mr Graham, this has been a very complicated process. Are you able to advise council and the public at large, I would suggest, that what stage are we at with some changes in relation to the Mornington interchange, and also what consultation have you had with the Department of State Growth, and also obviously what council officers have been basically as part of the discussions in relation to work on the Mornington interchange? Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we're still waiting to hear results from the Department of State Growth on their consultation plan and the next stages of the project. I'll certainly inform council once we're here.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Are there any other committee reports? Thank you. Councillor Kennedy.
Excuse me, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to table the minutes from the Burroath Community Arts Centre meeting of Wednesday the 12th of October. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have emailed through the minutes of the Event Special Committee for the last quarter and also the Cultural History Committee for September.
Thank you. Alderman Von Verdo was next, and then I'll take Alderman James.
I'd like to table the minutes of the Positive Ageing Advisory Committee for the 18th of August 2022 as approved at the 6th of October meeting. Thank you. And could I also note, just to remind everyone in the gallery, as well as the aldermen and councillors, that this week is Seniors Week and that we have a Clarence Festival of the Ages. And tomorrow there is an event at Wentworth Park that you might like to attend, which is called Wentworth Walk and Play at 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock. So I would like to see everybody there if possible. Thank you.
Alderman James.
Yes, look, I acted as Deputy Chair of the Tracks and Trails in Alderman Newington's absence, and if you're okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
The minutes of the 18th of August 2022 are certifiably ratified, and I'd like to pass them to Jill. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman James. Any other reports? Great. Moving on to item 4.6, the weekly briefing reports, that the information in them for the 26th of September, 3rd and 10th of October be noted. No questions. Alderman Blomley, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It might be the same matter, but anyway, the weekly briefing report of the 3rd of October, page 5, the Burroath Oval Transport Plan, the T20 World Cup and BBL Games for the 22-23 season. I know a number of other aldermen have also been contacted by concerned long-term residents of the area who have been very upset yet again by this proposed plan and the need for, for family members. Some of these members of our community are quite elderly to not be able to access, particularly Derwent Street, etc., during this period of time. I don't know what the workaround is, but I think I'm not necessarily criticising our communications plan or our engagement, stakeholder engagement piece, but it is of great concern. A number of residents have contacted me, very concerned about this, and when I've contacted council, told, well, they've got to show parking permits, etc. I understand all of that. I understand why it's in place, and so do they. But I just wonder if there's, in a way, I'm just expressing their disappointment and their concern with the process, their long-term residents, and if we could probably look at this in future to see whether there's another way that we might be able to make it easier for them, because it's putting unnecessary pressure also on the traffic management individuals and members of them. I think it's less so now, but some members of the police service as well. But I've just mentioned it because it's something that a number of residents have mentioned to me. So it's something we might like to consider for future such events.
Thank you. Alderman James, did you have a point?
Yes, I did. And it's along the same lines as the previous speaker, Mr Mayor. The Burroath Oval Transport Plan, at the last meeting, a member of the public drew council's attention to the safety of pedestrians actually accessing or coming to the buses in Park Street, and as a result,
I think there's an answer to that, a further answer to that under public question time. There's answers to questions on those. 5.3.
Okay, thanks. I was just wondering as to whether or not in this document there's no mention to the screening or the barricading around the buses, as was, I thought, normally the matter for any of further moving forward in relation to safety of pedestrians. So is that, has that been taken up, and through you to Mr Graham, as to advise as to whether the petitioning or putting that scaffolding or whatever you call it around those buses so that the pedestrians move in a certain direction and access the bus via that, so, by that particular safety route?
Yes.
Perhaps
look, there is a report there, but Mr Graham, do you have any further to add to that?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the BOC committee needed to make different arrangements for this one. Under the ICC rules, there's an 80-metre security exclusion zone, which means buses are virtually prohibitive within that zone. So there's a change in terms of the buses being made on Clarence Street. Certainly there's been lots of meetings in terms of how the coordination of the first games are today. It goes for a week, and a review will be undertaken after today's games just to see if any further changes are needed for the remaining games.
Okay. In that case, I'll call for motion that the officer's recommendations... Sorry. Councillor Warren.
Sorry, I'm just going for the trifecta, a third question on the same topic. Thank you through you to the CEO for prompt action last week when I raised, after contact from residents, that the briefing or the report to residents only went to a fairly small area, and the residents in a much broader area need to be aware of when these events are happening. And if I could just ask for an update, because I believe there was going to be a wider communication strategy as a result of my question.
Mr Graham or Mr Pask?
Through Mr Mayor, I'm uncertain on that one, but I'll inquire with the venue operator to see whether anything further immediately needs to go out, or what was the extent of information to the community. It's normally pretty broad in terms of all the Belrive
I might
Bluff
be able to
area.
add something further to that through you, Mayor. I'm not entirely sure what has happened with the T20 arrangements, but certainly around about 18 months to 2 years ago, I put in an arrangement with the previous general manager at Blunston to make sure that a very wide footprint of the Belrive area was covered, and I understand that that should still be happening, but we'll follow up to make sure.
Sorry, just to follow up, I think it needs to be wider. That was the message that I was getting last week, that the current only is people adjacent to the oval, whereas it actually affects everybody in the area.
Yeah, there's two things going on at the moment. The T20 arrangements, as Mr Graham alluded to, have some very heightened security arrangements because of the profile of the matches, and then underlaying that is the more sort of general widespread arrangement that we would normally have in place. So it's a fair bit more complicated than it normally is because of this event.
Councillor Mulder.
As an observation on the same issue, and having attended, at least part-attended, the very event today on your behalf, can I assure you that, given the look of the attendances, there was no need for a Belrive Oval transport plan at all.
Thank you. Any other matters before we proceed to a motion? Okay. So the motion that the officer's recommendations, as amended in the case of the previous minutes, be adopted. Could I have a mover and a second? Thank you. Alderman Pearce and Councillor Kennedy. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to public question time. There are no matters on notice. There is 5.3, an answer to a previous question taken on notice by Mr Marsh. We'll take that as read. It's in the agenda. So moving on to 5.4, questions without notice. Are there any members of the public who want to ask questions without notice? Jim, could you... If in coming forward you can state your name and address, please.
Mr Chair, Mornington. My question is to the CEO. Congratulations, by the way. Assuming that for the purposes of the Local Government Act, you are still the General Manager, for what reason and when did your role transition within Council as a corporate body from General Manager to Chief Executive Officer?
Look, I should take that. Council made a decision at its last meeting that, consistent with a lot of other councils throughout Australia and also with Hobart and Launceston, that we'd move to retitle the General Manager to CEO. In doing so, we approved a delegation to ensure that all the powers of the General Manager could be exercised by the CEO.
Thank you.
My name is Victor Marsh. I live at 32A King Street, Belrive. An elderly resident, Kath Hyland, who lives at the bottom of King Street, rang me at 6:20 p.m. tonight. She was very distressed about the constant noise coming from the arena. She said her house was vibrating, she wears a hearing aid and couldn't hear her television properly. My question is, has the council any authority to limit the amount of noise caused by music being played at the T20 World Cup?
Is that John Terry?
Through you, Mayor, we'll need to take that on notice because the permit that applies to the operation of the Oval is quite detailed, so I'm not in a position to answer that off the cuff.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr Marsh. Are there any other questions without notice? Thank you. We have deputations at item 6, deputations by members of the public. Could I remind all speakers that under meeting regs I can only allow 3 minutes. There'll be a warning tone at 30 seconds to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Our first deputation tonight is from Mrs Joanne Marsh in relation to local matters regarding Belrive Bluff.
You haven't said my address yet. I live at 32A King Street, Belrive. It was a childhood dream of mine to live on Burroath Bluff, achieved in 1979. By 1979, we were concerned about some of the planning decisions already made, such as the demolition of the town hall and units built in the playground of the original school in King Street. As ratepayers in the municipality of Clarence, we look forward to benefiting from the duty of care described in the Local Government Act, which would provide for our health, safety and welfare, represent our interests and provide peace, order and good government. Not long after moving in, we received an account from the council asking us to pay for the cost of concrete guttering across the entrance to our internal block. $250 was an unwelcome imposition on our budget. We also discovered that longer-term residents received a discount. The Clarence Football Club rooms were once located in Petchy Street. On Friday and Saturday nights, we often had to ring them after midnight and ask them to close the doors because of the noise nuisance created by a band playing. Bands at Burroath Boardwalk have created a similar nuisance. Next began the first of a number of proposed developments requiring incursions into the public open space of Burroath Beach Park. We attended a rally to stop practice wickets being installed in the park adjacent to Derwent Street. Over the decades, I became involved in more rallies to stop further incursions into the park, some successful, some not. Next, we had to battle to stop 5 units being built in front of us. It was very stressful standing in the chamber whilst heavily pregnant to address a council meeting. I have always believed that Burroath Bluff has special values worthy of protection. In the late 80s, council asked for submissions from the community to achieve this. I worked on a substantial document which was submitted to council. I did not receive any acknowledgement until I wrote to the Mayor at the time. I've made other submissions, but proper protection of the Bluff's special values has not yet been achieved. Next came the Burroath Oval redevelopments. The local community protested throughout this process. Of concern were incursions into the park, intrusive light towers, excessive light spill, traffic and parking congestion, litter, noise and stormwater management. The location of Burroath Oval has resulted in loud, abrasive music, continuous PA announcements day and night, fireworks, the Nitro Circus, low-flying helicopters, vehicular access for residents denied post-event, fire evacuation alarms beginning at 1 a.m. and continuing until morning. In the traffic chaos created on the first game under lights, fights broke out in the street. More recently, the newly opened public pier was covered in fish, blood and guts for weeks before steps were taken to maintain it. Now the safety and amenity of our streets is being impacted by ferry patrons parking all day. Consequently, I have no confidence in the council's understanding of their role in local government as clearly defined by the Local Government Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Marsh. Are there any other speakers?
Thank you, Mayor. Our next deputation is from Ms Tabitha Doherty in relation to the development application for 3 Drury Point Road.
Clarence City Council, I stand before you in opposition to the proposed development plan concerning 3 Drury Point Road. Taking into account the additional details provided in the updated associated document, it is clear there are still many flaws within the proposal. The hours of operation, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday to Saturday and 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Sundays and public holidays, are clearly unreasonable in consideration of the surrounding residential housing. This issue coincides with that of increased noise due to the road activity that would follow the proposal, which is thusly acknowledged by the proposal itself in section 5.4. Have there been any traffic impact surveys to properly assess this, and in clarification of the size of the trucks using this space, or an approved number of truck movements? Will any of the stored equipment be using diesel fuel? Consideration must also be given to the greater area that the development is located. What security measures would be proposed given its completion? What amenities to its employees would be given the ambiguity of the proposal itself? The proposal also implies that the development would be used for the loading and unloading of loam and FCR, amongst other things. This has the potential to generate an excess of associated crystalline silica dust, which is an obvious particulate health hazard, especially taking the proximity to residential properties into consideration and the prevailing winds common to this area. Section 5.9 states that the proposal would not conflict with the South Arm Rugby Corridor Plan. However, this is incorrect, as the said plan would lead to Droopy Point Road becoming a cul-de-sac. The increased traffic brought by the completion of the proposal would not be fit for such an area. There has been no correspondence between us, the property owners adjacent, and the developer regarding these issues. It is even said in the document itself, section 4.4, that the proposal is likely to adversely affect these residential dwellings in terms of visual amenity. From this, it can clearly be seen that the council's best interest would be to refuse this proposal. I ask that you take these points into consideration regarding your final choices on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Stockley.
Third and final deputation tonight is from Mr John Bessier in relation to the planning application for 3 Droopy Point Road.
I'd like to thank the people that came down, the members that came down to check the site out. Very well appreciated. Now, the hours of the earth moving operation, a total of 80 hours of earth moving business throughout the entire 365 days of the year, including Christmas Day, Good Friday and all the public holidays. I think that's a bit excessive. No, I don't think I know. How much traffic is expected? And the noise from heavy machinery, that this would make 1 and 5 Droopy Point Road left with no or very, very little amenity. No mention of what would be stored in the shipping containers or the use, is it chemicals, flammable goods, and is there any toilets facilities on site are going to be provided? No advice on prevailing winds which may impact by the way of dust, particles or contaminant matter becoming airborne from loam and FCR dumps. Approved number of truck movements per day, size of trucks, number and size of diesel machinery used on the site, refuelling arrangements for machinery on site. Particles of crystalline silica have the potential to present the loam and the FCR detailed in the updated plans. What provision is to be made for the dump site? Will it be enclosed or open? Is this permissible under the current legislation given the proximity between the residential properties and food outlets? There is no mention of any consultation with property owners adjacent to the site. Traffic impact surveys, noise, size of vehicles turning in and out of the site. Should the proposal be passed if these questions remain unanswered? I encourage the council to vote against it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Bezier. I now advise that Council intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. The only item we have under that section is item 7.1, a development application at 3 Droopy Point Road, Rugby Storage. Councillor Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have previously circulated an amended motion, which I believe is now on. It's an amended motion and I move that motion.
I have a seconder, please. Thank you, Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The motion, what we have before us is an application for a use.
Point of order. Sorry, Mr Mayor, that's the incorrect motion up on the board.
Yeah, we're just correcting that at the moment. That's it. Thanks very much. Clock starts again, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I made all sorts of assumptions I shouldn't have, didn't I? This is a local business zone. The use, although ill-defined, is actually permitted within that zone, and in all reality, we as a planning authority do not have the liberty to refuse it unless we find it is in breach of the scheme somewhere. It is an awkward lot. It is misshapen, it is an awkward shape. It is narrow, it is sandwiched between two residences that are in that local's business zone but are actually occupied as residences. They were lawfully erected and their use long predates the use for this site. As such, we have a conflict within a zone instead of conflicts between zones. So all that really is permitted for us to do is to try to strengthen the conditions that have been imposed upon this development in order to minimise the impact of what is a permitted use on that particular site. The council staff have already identified that it is deficient in parking spaces, the proposal, but they consider there is sufficient room on the site for the additional parking spaces to be included. If they are included and that condition is met, then once again there's not much we can do. The other condition relates to, or other two conditions relates to the hours of operation. Given its location, I think it is much better, it is really advisable that the hours of operation be trimmed back to suit the hours of operation with minimal impact. Despite the fact that the extended hours are permitted under the scheme, I think it's appropriate for us to send a message to the developers that given their environment, perhaps the hours should be amended as I've indicated. The last issue is the screening, the visual screening. Now the council planning staff, experts in the field as they are, have assessed that on the basis of the performance criteria, but that they need to do screening from public places. But the performance criteria in the scheme doesn't mention public places, it says screening for visual amenity. No greater impact could there be on the two adjoining residences than the visual impact from what amounts to private property. And that particular provision actually is in total conformity with the scheme. So I've added the condition that additional screening be provided to affect the visual amenity, and hopefully any dust and noise is also attenuated by the erection of suitable fencing and barriers adjoining the thing. So in essence, those are my attempts to try to get the best possible result for what is a permitted use under the planning scheme.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In the event that this motion is lost, I foreshadow the refusal motion listed under my name.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Kennedy.
Yes, thank you. And I'd be interested in hearing from my other colleagues around the table because a number of us did visit the property last week. There is definitely a loss of amenity here, and I feel for the residences that are going to be impacted. And I thank Tabitha and John for their deputations tonight. I'm concerned also about the safety issues with access to this block if we're talking about heavy equipment continually moving in and out. We're not quite sure about the traffic movements there. And the hours of operation. I understand that it's permitted under the scheme, and we did speak about this at length during our visit. But I would like to hear from colleagues that also visited the property because I am concerned about the loss of amenity to the residences that are border the property.
Thank you. Alderman Ewington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, obviously planning matters quite often involve conflict between different people in relation to what they propose to do with their pieces of land. And obviously this is one of those. The thing that I would like to point out to my colleagues is that the land is zoned business. The scheme says you're able to open at those hours, but while they might be able to operate later than what you would normally think a business might operate, I doubt whether there's going to be excessive trucks moving in and out at the times that have well into 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I don't think that's going to be the case. But at the end of the day, this is a permitted part of the planning. This is a permitted use under the planning scheme. Areas change over time, which means that some people have to move out or consider their options in the longer term. We've got warehouses nearby, and the whole strip is identified as that as a business use. You know, and I think the majority of other land is being used for that purpose. To say that someone can't do something which is permitted under the scheme is something that I can't support, and I'll be voting against this motion, as I would be voting against Alderman James's motion if he gets to that, and be putting forward the original motion, which is to recommend approval as per the officer's recommendation. They've gone through the hoops, they've come back and made their report, they've done the assessment on the traffic, they've looked at the planning scheme, and as far as I'm concerned, we should be approving this development as is recommended.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Burroath.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Through you to the Manager for Planning, Mr Lovell. Mr Lovell, could you explain to us what the proposed change at Part B6 would mean in terms of the trading hours being limited?
Mr Lovell.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the hours that are proposed, that are recommended, are the acceptable solution. As we explained last Friday, the meeting, a permit cannot purport to override a planning scheme. So what our view is that a condition which proposed lesser hours than the acceptable solution would be contrary to law and couldn't be enforced.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Other speakers? Councillor Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions through you to Mr Lovell. Given that this was advertised purely as a storage proposal, but we're now talking about it being sale of goods, there doesn't seem to be enough detail. I have so many questions which don't seem to be answered in here because it treats it merely as a storage solution. So I'm not seeing the detailed traffic management report that one of my colleagues referred to. I'm not aware of whether the traffic's coming from the main road or from Druthi Point. The fact that Druthi Point is planned to be a dead end eventually obviously has an impact, whether that's been taken into account. So, yeah, my 2 points that I'd like some clarity on from Mr Lovell is what is the actual proposal? Is it outdoor storage or is it a sales yard? And secondly, has a detailed traffic impact assessment been done?
Mr Lovell.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the application was made for storage. That's the basis it's been assessed on. In the event that it was used for something else as a dominant use, then that would require a different application. All we can do in reporting this to you is report on the applications before us and the insistence of the applicant that the use that they're proposing is storage, and to the extent that there may be some sales, I think the position is that that would be a ancillary and therefore part of the overall use of storage. That's the way we've assessed it. In relation to traffic, there was no traffic report required because it wasn't one of the standards to be assessed under the planning scheme. However, without belonging too far, we did refer in the report to our traffic engineers reviewing the issue and ensuring the conditions were appropriate for access.
Alderman Blanc.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'd like to thank Tabitha and John for their deputations this evening. And like many of us, I was able to visit on site and talk with the residents at 1 and 5 Druthi Point Road, and just note, as I said to them, the scheme is a scheme, and in many respects we're hamstrung by what we have before us, and as Mr Lovell just outlined, how this application's actually assessed. Of course, and then the question arises too, how is it enforced? If it's certainly approval's given for storage, and then that grows, whether that's deemed ancillary or whatever else, how that then is enforced to ensure that there is some amenity for the neighbouring residents. But whilst I was there, Mr Mayor, and we're all familiar with Druthi Point Road, but I was struck by the number of trucks. In the short time I was there today, probably 20 or 30 minutes, and then afterwards I went for a drive along Druthi Point Road, and I nearly got taken out by a truck hurtling along that road. Albeit this is, number 3 is just a turn off from there, but it is a well-used road, and this will certainly add to the number of heavy vehicles that are using that road and will impact, I have no doubt, the amenity of the residents at number 1 and number 5 Drury Point Road. In fact, one of the residents built her home 51 years ago with her late father, and obviously she's seen the changing face of her suburb, and she accepts that the change is inevitable, but change also needs to be fair. And I am very cognizant of the decision that we make tonight will impact one or more parties. But I'll come back to my starting point, Mr Mayor, and as tough as it is, I've got to say that the scheme is the scheme. And I acknowledge and appreciate the alternate motion this evening, and I thank Councillor Moulder for doing the work here, because I really think this is the best possible outcome. I'd be happy to support this motion, alternate motion. However, I'd have difficulty supporting the foreshadowed motion. So I'll just come back to the scheme as a scheme, and we're hamstrung.
Thanks, Alderman Bromley. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. I went down and had a look, and again I thank Tabitha and John for their presentation tonight. I am sort of supportive of Councillor Moulder's motion, because, as Alderman Bromley said, the scheme is a scheme. It's very hard to refuse it because the scheme said it's allowed. Now, going further down, we see some light industry, and there isn't trucks going there, and I'd like to, refuse this, but the scheme is a scheme, and it would be justly unfair to the applicant to say, you can do this in this scheme, but we say no, you can't, because it is ridiculous. We're supposed to be fair on everybody. Now, I think this of Alderman Moulder's alternative motion is probably the best we can get. Probably the best we can get. I mean, I don't like the road. I don't like there's no footpath on it and things like that. But, the applicant has done this. He's done it under the scheme. So I'm going to support this motion.
Thank you. Others, Councillor Walker.
Thank you. And a nice, tricky thing for the Planning Authority to decide on in its last iteration this term. There's a little bit to reflect on here, and I think it wouldn't hurt to just, through you to the planning officers, just talk about what local business is, because one would assume that term local business is very light commercial, but it would seem that otherwise. I think for a lot of people, the term local business would assume that maybe someone's going to be selling fruit and vegetables, or perhaps a dental clinic might be setting up there, and I think both those options would be preferable for the neighbouring residents than what's before us here. So just to confirm, what is the difference between local business and how does it compare with, I guess, general industrial?
Mr Lovell.
Yeah, well, of course, there are different zones for different purposes, and there's a quite extensive list of different purposes, but if I could summarise it, the area around it might be local business, light industry, which is for warehouses and small-scale, low-intensity, low-impact industrial activities. The sort of thing you see at Mornington and at Cambridge. Local business is primarily intended for a mixture or mixed range of commercial uses, some being light industries and some being small businesses, and looking at the nature of the uses that might be, includes food services and things like that, things that you don't see in light industry. It even allows for some residential use. So it's a different kind of amenity to say a light industrial zone.
Yeah, I think that people would rightly be confused about a zone that is local business in the sense of, as we said, the dental clinic and those other things, versus a site where you're going to have sort of open materials being moved around with very heavy vehicles, and and indeed, I do think there's going to be a dispersal of dust. I just think that that's just something that happens when you just lift a shovel and tip it. These are bigger shovels. So the conundrum is, where do we go? And the role of a planning authority is incredibly prescribed and restrictive. And then separate to that, just in general terms, I never think providing false hope is a good way forward. So, if you weren't just looking at it as the planning authority, then you'd take into things of, the conflict of a house next door to what's being proposed here. The reality is the planning scheme has shortcomings, and we can potentially wring our hands a little bit tonight. But I guess it's our job to not just decide on this, but for councils moving forward to be highlighting the multitude of shortcomings that we're seeing, to be really working with other councils to be actually going for order and good planning. So what are the choices for those sitting around the table tonight? There's the motion in its original form. There's a refusal, which I think would struggle. I wouldn't prejudge it, but I don't know that the grounds are particularly strong. And then there's this alternate motion that's been drafted. Now, if you compare the alternate motion that's drafted with what's in the agenda, then you have the comfort of extra screening. And then there's point 2, which then there is the point noted around the hours. So I will be supporting the alternate recommendation, but as I said earlier, I'm not in the false hope business. So when we look at the trading hours element of the motion, that is a request more so than a directive. It's not something that we can enforce, but it is something that we can lessen some of the impact if the proponents are to take that on board. So this isn't a straightforward one, and there's a limit of scope and comfort that can be achieved. And I think that what is before us in the motion achieves that as best as possible. So weighing these all up, it is my intention to support the alternative.
Thank you. Councillor Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do understand that this is a permitted use under the planning scheme. However, I am going to support this alternate motion from Councillor Mulder. And there are 2 main reasons for that, perhaps 3. Firstly, as Councillor Walker has said, I don't believe, I could be convinced, but I don't believe that an outright refusal would stand any chance of getting up, given that this is a permitted use in this zone. But I think we should do what we can to try and mitigate the impacts of this. For better or worse, there are 2 residences either side of this block. Now, whatever the zoning was when those were built, they are there. And I think it's important that we do what we can within the constraints to mitigate the impacts that will happen on those 2 residences. The information that has been put in here by Councillor Mulder, talking about better screening, talking about reducing hours, are 2 of the obvious ways we can do that. I have concerns about the amount of traffic on that road. We don't have a traffic impact study because it wasn't needed. But looking at that road and any additional heavy movement on there, as Alderman Blomley said, could be really difficult for people to live with. So I think if we can mitigate that somewhat by reducing the hours and by improving the screening to help reduce the dust and noise to the 2 residences, we should do that.
Thanks. Right reply, Councillor Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the contributions. I will point out that most have pointed out that this will be really difficult to refuse, and if we did refuse it, we're on a hiding to nothing. I do take the point, and I mentioned it in my original contribution, that the hours of operation may not be enforceable, but what they are is they are giving an indication to the operator of this business how to be a good neighbour, how to reduce conflict with neighbours. And in essence, that's what the screening thing is. Now, the screening thing is a legitimate enforceable condition under the planning scheme because, as I said, the report itself only talks about screening from public places, but the planning scheme doesn't talk about public places, it talks about all places. which would in this particular case is underlined by the fact that the adjacent places are actually residences, albeit they're in a local business zone. And so what we are doing is we are making the best of a bad lot. In terms of the traffic, we all know there's going to be a major bypass coming through there. This section of Drewfy Point Road will be a cul-de-sac, and I think that, and I would imagine that as part of the great redevelopment, as part of the future Skylands development, Drewfy Point Road is going to be upgraded significantly because it's going to get lots of pedestrian traffic, at least a bit from the proposed bypass down towards Drewfy Point. And it would be remiss of council if we didn't do this bit up the other end as well to enable the movement of trucks and traffic. If I had my way in a perfect world, we would have a micro zoning of those houses which would be residents and the existing uses like the bodyworks and the wrecking yards, and then further as you go down, it is clearly all light industrial / local business. So, but clearly these are houses, these are residents. The predominant use in this short section is actually residential, but that's not recognised by the scheme. And unfortunately, as we go say time and time again, the scheme may be the Clarence scheme, but as you notice, it's an instrument of the state government. It's an instrument signed by the minister, and it's an instrument that is ultimately administered by an independent body called the Planning Commission. And we simply sit here and we review it and we make recommendations, which, if they are wrong, is open to appeal, and if that appeal is the way. But we've got to do the best we can to enforce the planning scheme, not destroy it.
Thank you. So the motion before the Chair is the alternative motion from Councillor Moulder for approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to item 8, reports of officers. 8.1.1 is a response to a petition for equitable access to Little Harrow Beach, moved by Councillor Alderman Newington. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I'll second that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman von Burroath.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I stand here tonight very pleased to be in a position to say that hopefully, or I'm pretty confident now, we're going to get a resolution to this issue. Something that's concerned me for a long time. I look at Little Harrow Beach and the access between the stairs, the ramp and the car park, which got bricks coming through the surface, and it's very ordinary access, all round into that area. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate Bridget Lockley, who's in the gallery with us tonight, on the work that she's done for highlighting how poor access into these sorts of locations impacts on people in very big ways. And the story she told us about her daughter Rosie not being able to get onto the beach to play with her siblings and friends, coming home from school one day, if that wasn't enough to make us act and do something about it, I don't think nothing ever will. But like I said, it's a bit disappointing that it's taken us a while to get to here. I would have liked to have seen it happen sooner. But it is what it is, and I think that with the master planning now being done on Little Harrow Beach as a whole, I think there's a whole range of other issues that we need to tidy up in that space. Not only access onto the beach, but there's also access for kids riding to school to get into Harrow Primary School. There's access for better access to the washdown point, and hopefully we'll have the new steps sorted, or the temporary steps to sort out people walking down to the beach. And then looking at turning this whole area into something that is a real jewel in the crown for our community. At the end of the day, when you get to the nuts and bolts of this, the response by the staff here, I think that option 4 is by far the best option. It's something that will provide access to the beach, and having discussions with Bridget, I know that even the temporary access that is there now is much better than the rocks that were placed at the end of the path before. As soon as we can arrange to get the more substantial path built and installed, which is pretty similar in terms of function to what's the temporary unauthorised access that there is now. At least it's going to give access to not only people in prams and wheelchairs, but also people who have other mobility issues, and I think that would be really important. But looking at that space there, being pretty well aware of all the other things that are in there, there's an intertidal path that's got to tie into that area. which needs to be considered in the longer term as well. But here we are today. Some negatives about how long it's taken, but the positive is I think we're at a point where, as a group, I think we're all confident, we're all comfortable to spend the money, which has been in the budget all along, which is another issue. But anyway, it's there. Let's get on with it. And I think option 4 is the best one to move forward with. And once again, I'd like to congratulate Bridget and the power of the people to actually get the right decisions made and get us to get on with fixing what is a real issue in our community.
Thank you. Alderman von Burroath.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'm really pleased to see that in 3 months we've been able to look at this situation and the officers have been able to come to a solution in terms of a short-term measure. On the 25th of July 2022 at the council meeting, I asked a question in relation to whether or not there was any short or medium-term plan to construct a DDA-compliant beach access from the toilet ramp at 41 Harrow Road, which is the site we're looking at. And the answer I got was that short-term there aren't any easy and affordable options for that ramp at this point in time that we're aware of. Obviously, we're not looking at a DDA-compliant short-term option, but we are looking at a safe option to be able to access the beach. I'm the chair of the Positive Ageing Committee and I've been concerned about beach access for older people. We're also concerned about beach access for people who have a disability. And as Alderman Newington said, it's been brought to our attention that very young people who should be able to enjoy the beach cannot do that at this point in time. Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to ask the CEO of how we are going to transition from what is there now to, if you like, the unauthorised access that is there now, to what I hope will be an authorised short-term access, bearing in mind that where we are looking at is not council land, it is Crown land. So I'd like to know how we're going to transition and what sort of time frame that means, because from social media I can see that there's a lot of people who are very happy to know that there is some sort of access now, albeit that it's unauthorised, but it's access, and they expect access from here on in. So could we please have an answer in terms of transition?
Certainly. I'll ask the GM, the CEO, to respond shortly.
Thank you.
But as a matter of procedure here, it is important to note Part B, which states that the CEO's advice is that it is not possible to provide an equitable DDA access in the short to medium term. Having said that, and I think that really needs to be understood by the public, that it's not going to be DDA access, I think I'd like to ask the CEO to explain when we can, what the process is and what time it might take to get to full DDA access onto Little Harrow Beach.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the question. There's a couple of steps we need to take and they're underway already. We have a design already prepared for a non-DDA compliant ramp. We've previously spent time working on trying to develop DDA compliant designs to no avail because of the features of that area. But a non-DDA compliant design has been settled. We've applied to the Parks and Wildlife Service for Crown consent to do that work on the beach, and that process normally will take between 1 and 3 months, but we have been in contact with Parks to try and expedite that process, but we can't undertake work on the beach without that permit. And in the context of doing the actual work, we need to give contractors 3 to 4 weeks' notice, so we'll try and tie that into the permit process through Park so that that's coordinated. In terms of the longer term solution, we are working on the master plan for Little Harrow Beach. At this point in time, we are hoping to have a draft to Council for workshop by mid next year, and that will include DDA access options at that point in time, most likely towards the end of the beach where the rock wall is shallower, and most likely to also include new toilet and change facilities, because the existing facilities not only not DDA compliant, they're at end of life as well.
Thanks, CEO. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And may I say from the outset, I communicated with you on Friday and endorsed your comments in relation to the fact that we cannot obviously provide an equitable DVA access in the short and medium term, and the reasons are obviously set out in the report that's been provided. The other thing is that I'd like to congratulate Alderman von Burroath for her diligence and her time that she's actually put into this to be able to get this particular matter into this particular place, and with the recommendation that has been circulated, and it's under the obviously under the heading of equitable access to Little Harrow Beach. Also, I would like to compliment Mr Nelson, in as much as he has said, and I believe it's been circulated to us in Friday's circular, that the concrete or the cement that has been put there, basically unauthorised, is going to remain until such time as the officers can provide some degree of substantial conglomeration of that cement to make it suitable for wheelchair access in the short and medium term. That's my understanding, and I believe, Mr Mayor, okay, if it's not, if the General Manager is in a disagreement, then in fact I may have got it wrong, but the simple fact of the matter is that is Council going to remove that concrete placement that's been put in there to enable people with their wheelchairs to be able to access the beach? Now, my understanding is it's going to stay there for the short term, and it's going to be obviously there until such time as a equitable DDA access is provided, either in the short and medium term. So perhaps I could seek clarification through you, Mr Mayor, to General Manager, Senior Executive, sorry, to Mr Nelson, if he could please explain as to whether or not that temporary or that concrete pavement will remain in the short and medium term. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Alderman James. Thank you, Mayor. The advice I provided was that quickset concrete that had been placed there was already showing signs of breaking away at the edges. It's been very poorly laid and very poorly mixed, so it'll really depend on tide and weather action as to how durable it proves to be. We will inspect that area every week to make sure it's safe, but because we need permission to do work on Crown land and we don't have it at this point in time, if that area becomes unsafe, I'll have no choice but to stop all access onto the beach from that point, from a risk management point of view, as opposed to, had it been left the way it was before, we would have had access onto the beach other than for people with a disability. So it's a bit unfortunate, but we'll monitor it and keep it open as long as we can.
Okay, other speakers. Alderman Omni and then Councillor Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And Mr Mayor, I'd like to just acknowledge, as everyone else has, the advocacy of Bridget Lockley on this. It's been fantastic. It's been a long time coming, but here we are this evening. I'd also like to acknowledge particularly the efforts of the mover and the seconder of this motion, because both Alderman Newington and Alderman von Burroath have been leading the charge on this. It has been, it's often said that, the bureaucratic wheels move slowly, very slowly, in this case all too slowly, but it's good to see that there's some traction now. Is this the ideal result? No, it's not, but hopefully we'll get there. We'll get something that's fully DDA compliant, we'll have facilities there, we'll actually be in a position, as Alderman Newington and I discussed nearly 4 years ago, to actually ensure that this pristine part of our coastline is fully accessible by all, and that's the way it should be. But although it shouldn't be this hard, we're here now. I think it's a good position that we've landed in, not perfect. I appreciate, as the CEO said, that clearly we have a duty of care and there's a risk management element to this, but at least now, people can access that weren't previously able to access this beach. And that's the important thing. And surely that's why we're all here. That's why we're all here. So the outcome's not ideal, but I tell you what's a lot better than the outcome that wasn't there, or hasn't been there for nearly 4 years and then some. So well done to all involved.
Thank you. Councillor Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I too would like to thank Bridget and her family for their efforts in pushing this a lot faster than it was going, and I'm sorry that you had to do that. It should have happened without you having to go to that trouble. Look, I think one of the things that's really struck me, and this has certainly been longer than 3 months, this has been going on for many years, and some people have given up and in fact are no longer with us since this question was first raised, is that often we ask the wrong question. So instead of asking, as I've done in the past, how do we provide DDA access to the beach, we should be asking, how do we get people onto the beach? And sometimes it's not because the answer to the first question is it's going to take a long time, it's going to be really expensive. The answer to the second question, how do we get people onto the beach, might be a short-term workaround, as indeed we've ended up with here. And I think, again, looking at the other end of the beach where it's shallow, we could have done something much easier and much quicker and much less expensive if we'd talked to the Crown and looked at what the opportunities were. We have had on the books, on the budget for the last couple of years, a pilot program for the best practice access to the beach. I know we need to do it at Belrive Beach as well. We don't have proper access there. And it just brings us back to this point that we should be doing this at the beginning of every project, not at the end. We shouldn't be trying to retrofit access to places. Places should be accessible to all at the beginning. We've done a whole Belrive master plan and this hasn't been taken into account. We should be saying at the beginning, where is the access point? How does everybody access this facility? So I hope that that Bridget and family have done two things here. First of all, we've got a reasonable solution for the short term, but also just reminded us to keep asking those questions for every single project that we do, is how do we make sure this is accessible to everybody?
Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. And Alderman Councillor Warren, that's one of the best speeches I've heard, because like a lot of other people, I'm pretty annoyed it's taken this long. But I think your approach is very sound. It's something this next council should have a very, very serious look at. Because, and I again acknowledge the work of Bridget and the family and others that have tried to get this done. It's not only wheelchair access, it's many other things. When people have operations. They want to go to the beach. They can't just run down steps and whatever. So it's a lot more than just a wheelchair access. It gives people that are not able to walk down steps a chance to get to the beach. So it's not just wheelchair access. That's a part of it. But geez, I reckon it's tremendous. And Alderman Warren, I do agree with you. Let's start from the word go. Let's have a good look at this for the city.
Thank you. If there are no other speakers, by to reply, please, Alderman Newington. So the motion is, as recommended, that we note the petition. We note we can't provide DD access in the short to medium term, but we authorise the CEO to maintain safe and functional access onto the beach for as long as he possibly can. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda comes under governance. It seeks to approve community support grants totalling $10,866.90 as per listed in the agenda. I have a mover and a seconder, please. Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Seconded, Councillor Kennedy. Alderman Pearce, would you like to speak to it?
Thank you, Mayor. I've been through this pretty thoroughly, and I totally agree with it. There's only one I wasn't quite sure of when I read it, and that was Gurkha's cricket side or something. I thought that's strange. But anyway, look, I think all these clubs are quite in need of some assistance, and I think this is a great way to do it. So I'll certainly support this motion, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kennedy.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and it's interesting that that the Gurkha Legends Cricket Club, it was unsuccessful in its application for $1,500, and the committee, in its wisdom or otherwise, has made the point that the grant assessment panel had concerns with the lack of project scope and detail with this application. And as this is the club's first year setting up in Clarence using the Risdon Vale facility, we would welcome them back after the first season. They would be settled in and identify any eligible project for consideration. I think it's unfair. Why am I saying it's unfair? The Gurkha Legend obviously is receiving or has received the affiliation from Cricket Tasmania and Southern Cricket Association, and under the Southern Cricket Association we've been asked to play C grade for the season 22-23. Now, the reason why it would seem that the assessment panel did not grant the $1,500 is because there wasn't any identifiable project, and therefore the very basis of not granting the application is because that they are basically starting out and are not really coming forward or seeking a specific means for being able to be supportive of that application. But the very nature, Mr Mayor, of being affiliated from Cricket Tasmania and trying to look after the younger people who want to play cricket and use our Risdon Vale facility, which we've spent a lot of money on. A few years ago we spent close to $500,000 building that new facility out there, and a number of us in this place were there in attendance. Look, I have difficulty supporting this non-approval for the application. I do hear and I do read that they ought to come back and we welcome them back after the first season since they've settled in. Well, they have settled in. They've been playing cricket, obviously, for some time, 2014. They're affiliated with Cricket Tasmania. And if this particular application is refused, as it is part of this recommendation, then I don't think I can support it, because I believe that we should be doing everything possible as part of encouraging young people, and they have taken that step forward and received affiliation from Cricket Tasmania and have been under the Southern Cricket Association and are playing C grade for the season 22-23, then surely we can provide some monies to help them to carry on and be able to provide something for the younger people. And I think it's mostly for that particular area of Brisbane Vale and that facility to be able to utilise correctly. And therefore I think it's pretty tough on us to say no to them when in others groups have been approved, given that they have provided a particular item for or something there in relation to seeking support from Council's grants assessment. So reluctantly, Mr Mayor, I will not support this. If there had been some pro rata amount, you know, something in kind, perhaps $200, just as a seeding amount to sort of set them on their way, then I would be supportive of that. But to knock them out for the requested amount of $1,500, I think it's pretty bad, and it's not doing much for sport in our community. And we're trying to encourage young people to play cricket, to be out in the open and enjoy themselves. And I think this is a worthy application that should be supported.
Thank you. I'm going to hand the chair over and respond to that. I think that the committee that's looked at this has bent over backwards trying to help the club find a justifiable project under council's existing policy, a policy which each of us around the table has been involved in setting. To say that the committee should be recommending against the policy that this council set would be irresponsible. And under those circumstances, I think we need to be aware of that, and the public needs to be aware that this council was acting very diligently in regard to this application. Thank you. I'll take the chair back. Alderman Blomley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I was going to sort of make a comment along similar lines, and I still will, because none of us like saying no, particularly when sporting clubs have gone to the trouble of making an application. But as is contained on page 73 of our report, but also on page 8 of the Community Support Grant Assessment documentation, it quite clearly says here the Grants Assessment Panel had concerns with the lack of a project scope and detail. And after follow-up with the club, the items that have been requested for purchase are for normal operational expenditure of an organisation which is ineligible under the Community Support Grants guidelines. So as much as we would like to assist them, we can't. We've got some guidelines here that, as you quite correctly point out, Mr Mayor, we've all signed off on. Now, if individual members of our community, or dare I say all of them, want to make a donation of a couple $100, they're more than welcome to do that. But we can't do that with public funds, not until such time. And they've been encouraged you to come back next year and apply under the guidelines, like everyone else does. And I look around this chamber, and all 11, formerly 12 elected members, Mr Mayor, are very involved in sport in our community and are very supportive of sport in our community. And we'd love to be able to provide the financial assistance that clubs ask for, but it's fair for us then to ask them to do so under the guidelines of our policy. So I'm very keen to congratulate the committee on the recommendation they've made. I'm very happy to support the recommendation this evening.
Thanks, Alderman Blomley. Councillor Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Along a similar vein, I do thank the committee for their work and the fact that they followed up and attempted to get something that was acceptable under the guidelines. It clearly says in our notes here that the request was for normal operational expenditure, which is ineligible. And my concern is that if we had approved this, we would be setting a precedent. So I don't know what the operational expenditure was, where it was electricity or whatever, but it's clearly something that if we approve this particular grant, then every sporting club can come to us and ask for something similar. So we can't afford to change the policy and have a new precedent. So I'm fully supportive of the list that we've been given, which adheres to the grants policy.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yes, look, I'm not always the biggest fan of all the committees in their current structures, but I think that this is a committee well worth preserving, because I just imagine the joy of all of us sitting around a table with all the applications and how harmonious and strategic we would be as we look over all of them. So some of the things that I'll highlight through it, obviously the Burroath Historical Society is the quintessential run off an oily rag institution, so glad to see the funds going for that project. One of the ones that will have interesting spillovers is the U3A, the website upgrade. And, the fact of the matter is that you can design websites that are a lot more user-friendly and age-friendly. And this will not only be useful for U3A, but it's actually a really useful thing to encourage some other local businesses and other things to sort of see what best practice looks like in that space. So I'm pleased to see that going ahead. As a former kinder gym parent, the placement beam's great. I won't go through all of them. I will mention the Dragons Abreast though. They like to wake me up in the morning, and I'm pleased for that. And those new covers are really pleasing to see the money going to that. I think one of the ones that was interesting that didn't quite get there was the lost and found sculpture. I think that was a cool and quirky thing, but perhaps separate of the actual grants process, there are ways and means we can make it happen. And yes, aldermen can dig into their own pocket from time to time. I remember some high dudgeon comments around a funding amount for a men's shed. I certainly dipped into my own pocket for that, although some of the people that spoke the loudest, their hands were the shortest when it came to reaching into their own. Anyway.
Other speakers, Councillor Mulder.
I take note of it, and also that the Gurkha Club. My interest is the one in the Pipe Clay Lagoon, the lost and found sculpture, which got knocked back. I wasn't on the committee, and I'm sure it's met its guidelines, and maybe this isn't the highest priority for our grants program, but I was most interested to see the reasons for its refusal. The public and risk and liability for council if anyone got injured climbing on the sculpture. No evidence that the sculpture is compliant with Australian standards for playgrounds, and it has the potential to become a dumping ground. Now, those criteria are a little strange to me. Can't kids play anymore? Are we going to remove all the trees on council land because they are a climbing hazard from which people could fall? Please, if you're going to say we don't think this has sufficient merit, then say so. Don't dress it up in these sorts of reasons.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I would like to congratulate the members of the committee, because it's damn hard. I mean, we've seen these applications, they're very good, and like someone did have to miss out, and maybe those groups that missed out will come back again and be successful. I urge you to support the recommendation.
So the recommendation is we approve the list as shown in the agenda. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to councillor question time. There are no matters on notice. Answers to questions at the previous council meeting on the agenda. We'll take them as read. Are there any questions without notice? Can I start with Councillor Warren?
Thank you. Mayor, as this is our last meeting for this term, could I ask for an update, please, on the status of the Rosny Hill development, through you perhaps to the CEO?
Mr CEO, can you help us there, please?
Thank you. Unless Mr Pask has anything further to add, I haven't had an update in some time.
Could you remind us where we are then?
Yes, we're waiting for feedback on a lease, and that's really where we're at the moment, unless Callan has anything to add.
Through you, Mayor, that's correct. We're still negotiating draft lease with the proponent, and we'll of course bring that back to council once we've made progress on that.
Thank you. My second question, and this is through you, Mayor, perhaps to our Chief Financial Officer. Has council ever considered giving a grace period for payment of rates in a similar way to energy suppliers like Aurora do, for example. I understand that our rates attract a penalty the day that they're overdue, whereas most organisations give a week or a couple of weeks grace. So I just wondered if that's something that council might like to consider in the future.
Ms Murray?
Through you, Mr Mayor. No, we don't actually have that. We do have a hardship policy that they can come and apply for, and we can consider interest and payment terms under that.
It is something a future council may well wish to consider.
Thank you. Yes, I'm aware of the hardship policy. It's just that a lot of people, especially people who pay in cash, tend to leave it to the last moment, and then things can go wrong and life gets in the way. So thank you for that answer, and it's something if I'm here in November, that I'll consider taking forward.
Alderman James.
Yes. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have two questions, and firstly, the first question is I spent a good hour with the manager of the Clarence Lifestyle Village last week, and of course most of us are aware that they have a request for an extension or urban growth boundary movement into the area that they purchased along the East Irwin Highway. So my question through you to Mr Lovell. Mr Lovell, where are we at in relation to the Clarence Lifestyle Village request, and is there any light on the horizon as to whether the TPC will be considering an application from this place in the foreseeable future?
Through Mr Mayor, an application for planning scheme amendment was received several months ago. We've asked for further information. We have not had that information provided to us, so there's no further action we can take or advice we can give you. We can't advise you on the likely course of action, what we might recommend to council, obviously, or what the TPC might say, until, of course, we actually receive the information that's been requested.
Thank you. And my second question is in relation to the decision of this place in relation to the 7 Mile Beach structure plan, which was part of a number of conditions in relation to Regal Court. Is Mr Graham or Mr Lovell in a position to advise this place as to the current situation in relation to that progress, and presumably the new council will take some ownership or stewardship of that particular matter once we have that information to hand?
Mr Lovell.
Through Mr Mayor, there is a live appeal on it, although it's on hold at the moment, I believe. I can't really add to that. However, I'm happy to do a weekly briefing report to update council where it's at the moment.
Thank you.
Alderman Gomberto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I think my question might be related to Alderman James's question, because I think his was two-pronged and perhaps only got part of the answer. I'd just like to know where we're at with the 7 Mile Beach local area plan development.
Thank you. Mr Lovell.
Through Mr Mayor, yes, the first major phase is virtually complete in that the community consultation and engagement process has been completed, and we are waiting on a final report on that from the consultants to the steering committee. If that report's considered satisfactory by the steering committee and no further work needs to be done, then we'll be able to go forward to a council workshop, and if happy from there, the consultants will then proceed with the final major stage, which is the plan based or arising from the consultation.
Thank you.
And my second question is, could we be apprised of where the Armend golf course permit substantial commencement is at? I'm aware that was the key date was the October the 1st, so could we?
Through Mr Mayor, it is correct to say that the expected expiry date has come and gone. However, we have received a correspondence from the applicants' legal representatives which claims that they have achieved substantial commencement. and that they will provide further information to justify that proposition and to seek, presumably to seek council's view of that. At the moment, we haven't received that further information, so we're not in a position to consider whether or not substantial commencement has been achieved. However, we anticipate that shouldn't be too far away, although we are in the hands of the applicants at the moment.
Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I say great minds think alike. I had 2 questions prepared. One was Rosny Hill related, the other one was Clarence Lifestyle Village, and people got to them before I did. So I won't let this opportunity pass, Mr Mayor. It might be the last time I have an opportunity to ask a question in this place. The precursor to my question is that 2 weeks ago I was approached at the Burroath Yacht Club by some elderly residents regarding waste collection. They had a concern because of mobility issues and their bin not being collected, etc. I left the luncheon, called the customer service line. Hayden wasn't available, the manager wasn't available, but Isabel and staff took the call very professionally and then escalated that very quickly to Mrs Coleman. And I'm pleased to say, Mr Mayor, and the next day Mrs Coleman, on her day off, as I understand it, went around to see these residents to ensure that the matter had been addressed. So my question, Mr Mayor, is if the CEO, Mr Mayor, could please pass on the appreciation of a very appreciative alderman, but also some residents who were so impressed by the customer service that Mrs Coleman and her team were able to provide. So thank you very much.
CEO, could you answer the question, please?
And there's no second question.
Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I put in an order to request about potholes in Derwent Street, I think Church Street, and roads around Winston Arena. Now, I only went in, I think, last week, but seeing that the cricket's on and it's a World Cup, are we doing anything quickly, or maybe we've done it, to get those potholes fixed? Because, I mean, that really doesn't look bad. A lot of people, it really looks bad with people all around the area, and we've got potholes in the main street. And I don't know, it may have been done, I hope it has been, but maybe it hasn't.
Mr Graham.
Through Mr Mayor, this hasn't been brought to my attention, but I can have it reviewed. But we possibly can undertake the works, but it has to be well prior, before security provisions are actually done for each game. But I'll try and give this one a priority.
Thank you.
Now, can I, Mayor, also the question is, can we congratulate the staff? Because I did have a phone call about the footpath at Anzac Park, which was shocking, and I had two ordinance requests in, and the person is extremely happy what we've done there.
Thank you. Lucky this is the last meeting. I would hate to have set a precedent that would be enduring. Councillor Walker.
It's not election on, is it?
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, my question is in relation to the Boulevard site, a most interesting council special planning meeting I don't think I've sat on ever. Just wondering where the status is with that project after council's non-approval, but then approval by delegation.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor. The Boulevard site has some similarities to Rosny Hill. We're waiting on a response back from Hunter. We've provided them with information, including evaluation of the site, and we're just waiting to hear back from them. Again, if Mr. Pascoe has anything further to add, I invite him to do so.
Through you, Mr Mayor, no, the CEO's covered that adequately. We're waiting on feedback from the proponent on to progress the sale of the land following the approval of the development.
So the second prong to that, without wanting to go all the way down hypothetical alley, is there's a potential that they may not wish to pursue the purchase.
Look, that's really hypothetical.
You can't rule it out that couldn't
possibly
happen.
Comment on that.
I think that. All right. Look, other question, and I do thank colleagues here for the multitude of notices of motions that they supported through this term. One of them was in relation to parking contributions and looking at ways and means in how, when contributions are required, there might be a more staggered process for council being able to get that funding. That was a matter that was going to be taken up with the states, I believe. Again, just wondering if there's any update or progress on that.
Not that I'm aware, Alderman Walker. I'd need to follow up on that one, take it on notice.
Alderman Ewington.
Thank you. Just a couple of things, I suppose, because my last chance to ask a couple of questions. I just wanted clarification, get it on the record. And probably sorry to put you on the spot, CEO, and I suppose through Mr. Graham, but a couple of things that I've been trying to follow up. I suppose Burroath Beach Master Plan, have we got an update on, is there any internal work started on that, or is it still sitting there waiting to commence, or when will we expect that to happen?
Mr. Graham?
Our internal staff have started the process on that, but I will have to confirm in terms of what anticipated workshop timing we're planning to come to the new council on that project.
And lastly, the steps at all Harrow Beach. Is yours. We'll go from day to day when we get the ramp done and the steps. Is there any idea, Mr. CEO, in relation to that they shouldn't be far away, I would hope?
Through Mr. Mayor, the steps will be in before the end of this year. There's the possibility that it may be the same contractor as the ramp, and so they're going to be undertaken individually or both at the same time. But it certainly has been confirmed to me that the steps will be in by the end of this year.
Thank you.
Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Mr. Graham again. I'm just following on from Alderman Pear's question of last meeting with regards to Parkway Esplanade, and the response was that the grader was hopefully going to be there at the end of October or first week of November. Do we actually have a confirmation of date, just to stop people from
I haven't got
asking?
Yeah. Sorry, through Mr. Mayor, no, I haven't got a confirmation on the date, but I'll recheck with our crew and advise council.
Okay, thank you for that. That's all.
Councillor Mulder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In state and federal governments, there is a very long-standing convention that elected members of Parliament and that government staff or operators do not receive directors or sitting fees for serving on government business enterprise or government boards. Does the same apply to council, the joint authorities, boards, committees, etc., on which we or the staff sit?
CEO.
Thank you for the question. There is no rule that I'm aware of that precludes sitting fees, and in fact in a number of councils that occurs for particular boards. There is one that applies here, and that's a sitting fee for the C-Cell director, and that's on the basis that it applies equally to all those directors.
Yes, this is a matter for the next question as a follow-up or a second question, whichever way you like. Do you think, Mr. Mayor, that it is appropriate that we have a look at that?
Look, I don't see the need to have a look at that. I think that's a matter for council in the future. I will point out that there's been plenty of precedents for that. I'm aware of other councillors on this council who have had other positions in joint authorities or boards that have been able that have been entitled to some sitting fee for the jobs that they're doing. And, for example, well, I don't need to go into examples, but there's plenty of precedents. Right, that brings us to the end of the formal agenda, but before closing the meeting, there's a couple of things that I'd like to do. Firstly, if I could, I'll leave my seat for this. I could ask Alderman Ewington to come forward, please. I'd like to take the opportunity of presenting him with a certificate of recognition for the service that he's provided to the people of Clarence and Clarence City Council over 4 years now. Dean has been a passionate advocate for active and outdoor recreation. He's been a passionate advocate for preventative health, and in that capacity he's served on many committees, including the Sport and Rec Committee, the Bicycle Steering Committee, and there are many others as well. Dean, can I say congratulations and thank you very much for your service to the City of Clarence.
Thank you very much.
I can offer you 3 minutes on the right reply.
It's an honour and a privilege to be, given the opportunity to represent the community in any shape or form, and I'm very proud of the fact that I was lucky enough to have people have faith in me to do that. I mean, it's obviously, as Doug mentioned, having the opportunity to sort of push the healthy lifestyle and health and wellbeing side of things is something I'm very passionate about. I would like to have got a little bit more done. It's been as you mentioned, Brendan, the wheels of bureaucracy probably don't turn as fast as you'd like to when you're used to making the decision one day and implementing the next. And I know that's been a challenge for probably some of the staff that I've been dealing with at times. But look, the thing that I can sort of sit back and be reasonably proud of is that I was convinced you guys to establish a Sport and Rec Committee, and it didn't turn out the way we wanted in the long run. But I think that the fact that we came up with the active living plan, which hopefully gives the council direction and a bit of a strategy in relation to some of the things I think are really important moving forward. Looking at some of the major, I just want to highlight a couple of things in that I really want to talk about, which was the need to get a formal structured process into the application for capital grants. The way we do things at the moment is might have worked in the past, but now the real thing I think about is that we've actually taken away the ability for community groups and sports clubs to do things for themselves. We've got to do all the work. It's got to be approved by us. It's got to be designed by us. But if we come up a way with a grants process where community groups can come along and raise a bit of money themselves and give preference to people that are able to do that and get volunteer labour, get donations, and actually give them the chance to take a little bit more control back over their things, and having a grants process that does that, but also too looking at what we had tonight with the community grants, having a structure like that for the sporting clubs specifically, and deal with the issue you brought up, Richard, about how do we support start-up sporting groups and have a criteria that allows them to be supported. But the other thing is, it's also the community in general, because not everything's about sporting clubs, and that's the other thing that came out of the Sport and Rec Committee, and I think John and Tony agree with this, is that it's all about, it's not all about competitive sport, it's about giving the community an opportunity to have infrastructure to help them do the incidental stuff and the non-organised stuff. And I know, Beth, you talked about that as well, and that's something I think is really important for all of us to work on in the next few years as part of that strategic plan. But anyway, and other than that, guys, I'm probably upset a few people over the time, but other people didn't mind upsetting me with certain, so that's life.
That's life.
But anyway, look, I wish you all the best. You guys in the election, it's up to the people now, and I suppose the other people that put their hand up, and anyone that puts their hand up and offers to represent the community and take all the crap that comes with it at the time, deserves a pat on the back, and I wish you all the best. And lastly, Doug, to you, mate, all the best in your retirement. You've been a fantastic leader of the city for a long period of time, and I wish you all the best in the future. And just to the staff, all of you guys, I know it's a difficult thing for you to have to work with 12 other people telling you what to do at times, or trying to tell you what to do. But it's been a pleasure working with all of you, and I think all the best to everyone in the future. That's enough.
And if I could now invite former Councillor Luke Edmonds to come into the chamber one last time. Luke, can I congratulate you and thank you on behalf of the people of Clarence and Clarence City Council for the service you've provided over 4 years. You've been a passionate advocate for inclusive infrastructure and also for cost of living issues, and represented the community with special outstanding service. And on behalf of Council, I'd like to offer this little certificate of recognition, and thank you again.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to say a few words?
Actually, I wasn't sure if I was allowed to speak. I'll keep it very brief.
You can fire me if you don't.
First off, obviously, thanks to the 11 of you, led by you, Doug, for work. It's an interesting group to work together, and obviously had no idea what I was signing up for 4 years ago. Some probably weren't in those shoes, whether it was 4 years ago or 40 years ago. So Thank you for you and the camaraderie that we've built as a unit, and I hope that the next group get to do something similar. Ian, from you all the way down, thank you to all the staff who are both in this room on Monday nights or that room, all the way through to the people who probably couldn't name 3 of us if they saw the 12 of us, who are just doing their job every day. And I think that the way the council operates, is a credit to us most of the time. And when things go wrong, we obviously hear about it. And obviously thanks to the community who put us here and have provided us with the feedback that's really set the policy agenda for the place. And there's obviously different places you can get that community feedback from, and we've had some interesting issues over the journey. But look at tonight with the work done with Bridget down at Harrow. It goes to show if you keep your ears open to what people are saying, you can achieve good things for your community. And lastly, obviously, best of luck to those who are standing at the next election. Wish you all the best. Be interesting to see the dynamic of the new room, but I'm sure under Ian's tutelage things will go really smoothly. So, yeah, all the best, everyone. Thanks.
You can sit down if you like. It seems only fair that the mayor doesn't get away with being awarding things to other people and not having something said about it. So you can't necessarily hide over there, So, on behalf of the elected members of council, I should like to say a few words. You've been on council since 2000, deputy mayor from 2007 to 11, and mayor since 2011. Now, with the assistance of some technical staff at council, we estimate that this means you have attended roughly 80 meetings as deputy mayor, chaired over 200 meetings, some 600 hours as mayor. He feels every one of them, you can tell. Over your term on council, that service equates to approximately 440 meetings and probably around 132,000 pages of agendas to consider. And that doesn't even mention the workshops. As a councillor, you've been particularly focused on the economic and community development challenges facing our rapidly growing municipality, along with understanding and managing the impacts of climate change. You have served as President of the Local Government Association of Tasmania from 2015 to 2019, as a Vice President of the Australian Local Government Association from 2016 to 18. You also represented Clarence on the Joint Ministerial Committee on the Hobart City Deal and the South East Regional Development Association. In your spare time, you also served as the Chief Owners Representative for Taswater from 2018 for a 3-year term. And I'm sure there are other things that I've forgotten along the way, but I only had about 2 minutes to talk. So on behalf of us all, the current and previous elected members of council, I'd like to thank you for the hard work you've put in over the years. It hasn't always been the easiest job. We can be a fractious lot at times, and there are occasions, I know, when you've had to put aside your personal feelings to represent the decisions of council to the public. I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say, as you move into the next stage in your career, please take all our thoughts and best wishes with you and Joe.
Thank you.
It's not over yet. I would like to take this opportunity to say a few words as well. And even as I look at my notes, there are so many more things that I'd like to say. So, Councillor Chong has spoken about Mayor Chipman's service to the Clarence community over 22 years, including 11 years as Mayor. As I look around this room tonight and I reflect upon the relationships that Doug has built with not only the executive team but all staff, there isn't one example where I can think of it going wrong or awry in any way. There is so much respect for what you've done and how you've conducted yourself and the things that you've achieved through all the staff, that it is a truly exceptional effort and well done on that front. What I wanted to talk about was my 3 years as General Manager working with Doug. There's been several occasions where people within local government sphere have remarked to me about Doug's leadership and engagement through local government in Tasmania. Proudly, part of that feedback has been that we have one of the best, most capable mayors in Tasmania, here in Clarence. And that wasn't just one piece of feedback in the last couple of months when people knew that you weren't running again. This has been consistent over my 3 years as General Manager, and it's something that I haven't passed on before, but I thought it was important to do so tonight. I'd also like to speak about Doug's support for both me and my predecessor, Andrew Paul. And I won't purport to talk in Andrew's shoes about tonight, but I'll reflect from my point of view. The roles of Mayor and General Manager are challenging. Speaking from my experience, Doug has fostered an environment that is very much like a partnership. The roles of Mayor and General Manager cannot exist in isolation, and Doug's approach has always been open and transparent. That is not to say we haven't disagreed with each other at times. Rather, we've always found a way to be pragmatic and solution-focused, and I think that's what has made our relationship so effective and enjoyable. And as an anecdote to that, there have been times when we've driven all the way to the other end of the island and sorted out an issue. But we got there. Doug, personally, I'll miss your leadership and your care and support. I want to wish you and Joe all the best for the future. And while I'm certain you won't be a stranger and you'll always be welcome here at the council chambers, I'll miss our daily conversations and our camaraderie. Thank you.
Well, I haven't been able to prepare for this because I guess I was feeling a bit emotional about it, and I'm a bit overwhelmed with comments. Thank you very much. It's been an amazing 22 years, and I'll be forever grateful for the people of Clarence for entrusting me to be a councillor. It's a privilege. I know you understand what a privilege it is, but it is a true privilege to be the people's representative in Clarence City Council, and it's been a true privilege too to be able to work with such a professional team of staff who, in every sense of the word, have been absolutely professional and considered, in my view, in the way that helped us as elected representatives find our way through some enormous challenges over the last 22 years. And you only have to look at some of the challenges we've faced, not only in terms of development, opportunities within the city, but in terms of coping with the threats. We've had some dreadful bushfires, for example. We've had some dreadful floods, coastal erosion and things like this. All of these issues, we've been able to, as a council, elected representatives and staff, find a way forward, and that's never easy. The biggest challenge, I think, is whenever anybody has a good idea, a good proposal, that there's chasms in the community can develop, and it is a real challenge for councils to straddle those chasms and find a way forward which is sensible, productive, and leads us all to a better place, the Clarence that we love and love to work and play in. So, am I leading with regrets? I'm going to miss the cut and thrust of council meetings. I'm going to miss the camaraderie that's there. It's sometimes stronger than others. I'm going to miss being involved in big projects that affect our community. I guess it's not me retiring, it's a reset. There are other opportunities, and I certainly will be looking. Won't be shy about lobbying councillors in the new council, but I would like to formally take this opportunity to wish you all the best in the forthcoming election, and I have every confidence that the new council, when it forms, will continue to service the citizens of Clarence in a magnificent way, and I wish them all the best, and you all wish you the best as well. Thank you. No, I close the meeting. Thank you. No closed meeting.
No.
Very good.